High Counselor Thelana stood in the crystal chamber that served as the command center of the Volani Republic. Her body was made of living crystal that changed colors with her emotions. Right now, those crystals were a deep purple that meant fear and sadness. Around her, other Volani worked at stations made from the same crystal material that grew from their planet's core. The news coming from their outer colonies was terrible. 3 star systems had gone completely silent in the past month. The last message they received was from the mining world of Kethara. The transmission showed strange black ships appearing in their sky. But then everything went dark. "Show me the readings again," Thelana said to her aide Veltar. The younger Volani's crystals flickered with nervous energy as she activated the display. A holographic image appeared in the center of the room. It showed the edge of Volani space where their peaceful colonies had been for hundreds of years. Now there was nothing but empty space and dead planets. "The energy signatures are unlike anything we have seen before," Veltar explained. "These ships seem to absorb everything they touch, plants, animals, even the metal from our buildings. It all disappears into their hulls." Thelana felt her crystal body grow cold. The Volani had never encountered anything like this in their long history. They were a peaceful people who had spread across 12 star systems over the centuries. They grew their cities instead of building them, using crystal technology that worked with nature rather than against it. They had no weapons. They had no armies. The concept of war was so foreign to them that they barely understood what it meant. When other species in the galaxy spoke of conflict, the Volani thought they were telling stories or speaking in metaphors. "Have we received any response from the other species?" Thelana asked. Veltar's crystals dimmed with disappointment. "The Corvani Empire says this is not their concern. The Nexus Federation claims they are too far away to help. The trade union wants to negotiate with these invaders instead of fighting them." Thelana walked to the great window that looked out over their capital city. Crystal spires grew from the ground like frozen music, their surfaces reflecting the light of their twin suns. Gardens floated between the buildings, filled with plants that sang in harmony with the wind. Everything was beautiful and peaceful, but for how long? The door to the chamber opened, and Commander Kelwin entered. He was one of the few Volani who had any experience with other species, having served as a diplomat to the galactic community for many years. His crystals showed the deep blue color of serious concern. "High Counselor," he said, bowing slightly. "I have prepared the message as you requested, but I must ask again, are you certain about contacting the humans?" Thelana turned from the window. She had been thinking about this decision for days. The humans were known throughout the galaxy, but not in a good way. Other species called them Deathworlders, beings who came from a planet so dangerous that they had evolved to be violent and aggressive. Most civilized species avoided humans when possible. They were too unpredictable, too willing to use force to solve problems. Their ships were covered in weapons, their culture was built around conflict, and their history was filled with wars against each other and anyone else who crossed them. But they were also the only species that had never lost a major battle. "We have no choice," Thelana said finally. "Everyone else has refused to help us or cannot reach us in time. The human fleet is the closest military force to our territory." "But High Counselor," Kelwin said, "you know what they say about humans. They solve every problem with violence. If we invite them here, how do we know they won't decide we are the problem?" It was a fair question. The humans had a reputation for being barely controlled savages who would shoot first and ask questions later. But Thelana had studied their history, and she had noticed something that other species seemed to miss. Yes, humans fought constantly, but they also protected those who could not protect themselves. Their stories were full of heroes who died, defending strangers. Their laws were built around helping the weak and innocent. They might be violent, but they were also honorable. "Send the message," she ordered. Kelwin activated the communication array. The message would travel through subspace to reach the human patrol fleets that operated on the edge of known space. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. "This is High Counselor Thelana of the Volani Republic," she began, speaking into the crystal transmitter. "We are a peaceful people who have never harmed anyone. We have no weapons and no knowledge of war. but something terrible is coming for us." She paused, trying to find the right words. "How do you explain horror to beings who live with violence every day? Unknown ships have destroyed 3 of our colonies. They consume everything they touch. Our people, our buildings, our entire worlds. We have asked other species for help, but they have refused us. You are our last hope." The message continued, for several minutes, with Thelana explaining everything they knew about the threat. She offered their most advanced medical technology in return for protection. She promised rare crystals that could power starships for decades. She even offered to share their secret of growing living cities. But mostly she just asked for help. The message ended and the chamber fell silent. Now there was nothing to do but wait and hope that someone would answer. Far away on the edge of human space, Captain Juan was finishing his patrol route when the message arrived. He was aboard the dreadnought Iron Mountain, a massive warship that carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The ship was not beautiful like the Villani cities. It was built for one purpose: to fight and win battles. Juan was reviewing supply reports when his communication officer called out, "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from outside human space. It's unusual." "Put it on screen," Juan ordered. The image of Thelana appeared on the main display. Juan had never seen a Villani before, and he was struck by how delicate she looked. Her crystal body seemed like it would shatter if touched too roughly. When she spoke of having no weapons, he believed her completely. But when she described the enemy ships, Juan's expression grew serious. He had heard stories about mysterious raiders that appeared from empty space and disappeared just as quickly. The reports were always the same: entire colonies vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only empty worlds. "Sir," his tactical officer, Lieutenant J, said, "if these raiders are heading toward human space after they finish with the Villani." Juan nodded grimly. He understood the implications. These creatures, whatever they were, would grow stronger with each world they consumed. If they were allowed to destroy the peaceful Villani Republic, they would then turn their attention to more defended targets, like human colonies. "Set course for fleet headquarters," Juan ordered. "Maximum speed, and send a priority message to Admiral Nari. Tell her we have a situation that requires immediate attention." The Iron Mountain changed course and accelerated toward the main human fleet base. In his quarters, Juan studied the Villani message again and again. He had spent his entire career fighting pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens, but he had never faced an enemy that consumed entire worlds. This was going to require every weapon humanity possessed, and possibly some they had never used before. The Villani had asked for help, and they were going to get it. But Juan wondered if they truly understood what they were asking for. Humans did not fight gentle wars or use minimal force. When humanity went to war, they brought everything they had and used it all. The peaceful crystal beings were about to learn what it meant to be protected by Deathworlders, and the galaxy was about to see why other species feared the human fleet, almost as much as they feared the monsters that came from the void. Admiral Nari stood in the command center of the human fleet base, watching the massive display that showed all of human space. Red dots marked the locations of their colonies. Green dots showed fleet positions, and now there was a new yellow area that represented the Villani Republic and the threat moving toward it. She was a woman who had spent 40 years in the human navy, fighting in more battles than she cared to remember. Her gray hair was pulled back in a military style, and her face showed the scars of someone who had been in real combat. Right now, she was thinking hard about a very difficult problem. "Show me the tactical analysis again," she ordered her staff. The display changed to show what they knew about the enemy. The information was not good. These raiders, who the intelligence reports were calling devourers, seemed to be some kind of living ships. They absorbed everything they touched and used it to make themselves bigger and stronger. According to the Villani transmission, Captain Juan explained, they've already consumed 3 entire star systems. Each time they attack a new world, their fleet gets larger, and they're heading for human space after they finish with the Villani, added Commander Bach, the fleet's intelligence officer. If we let them destroy 12 more worlds, we'll be facing an enemy that's 5 times larger than what the Villani are dealing with now. Admiral Nari walked around the display, studying it from different angles. The choice was clear but not easy. They could wait and prepare their defenses, hoping to stop the Devourers when they reached human territory, or they could strike first while the enemy was busy with the Villani worlds. "What forces can we deploy immediately?" she asked. Captain Juan stepped forward. "Battle Group 7 is ready to move. 12 heavy cruisers, 48 destroyers, and the carrier Sol's Fury. That gives us over 300 fighter craft and 15,000 Marines. How long to reach Villani space?" 18 days at maximum speed. Admiral Nari thought about the numbers. It was a large force by human standards, but they would be fighting an enemy that grew stronger with every victory. The longer they waited, the harder the battle would become. "There's something else to consider," Commander Bach said quietly. "The other galactic species are watching this situation very carefully. If we succeed in stopping these Devourers, it will show them that humans can be trusted to protect the weak. If we fail..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. If they failed, humanity would be seen as just another aggressive species that couldn't protect even themselves, let alone others. Admiral Nari made her decision. "Captain Juan, you have command of Battle Group 7. Your mission is to protect the Villani Republic and destroy the Devourer threat. Use whatever methods you think are necessary." Those last words were important. In human military tradition, they meant that normal rules did not apply. Juan would have permission to use weapons and tactics that were usually forbidden, even by human standards. Within hours, the fleet was preparing to leave. The Sol's Fury was the largest ship in the group, a massive carrier that housed 300 fighters and their pilots. Commander Rin was one of those pilots, a young woman who had grown up on a colony world that had been attacked by pirates when she was a child. She had joined the Navy to make sure other children never had to experience what she had gone through. "Attention all pilots," she announced over the fighter bay communication system. "We're going to help some people who can't help themselves. The enemy we're facing is unlike anything we've fought before. They don't just want to conquer or steal, they want to consume everything." The pilots listened carefully as she explained what they knew about the Devourers. These were not normal enemies who could be reasoned with or frightened away. They were more like a disease or a plague that had to be completely destroyed. On the marine transport ship Thunder Bay, Colonel Day was briefing his troops. He was a veteran of the colony wars who had earned his reputation fighting in close combat against alien raiders. His soldiers respected him because he always led from the front and never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. "The people we're going to protect are called Villani," he explained to the assembled Marines. "They're peaceful creatures who have never hurt anyone. They look like they're made of crystal and they probably are more fragile than they appear. But they're counting on us to save them." Sergeant Min raised her hand. She was one of the most experienced soldiers in the unit, with scars from a dozen different battles. "Sir, what's the enemy like up close?" "We don't know yet," Colonel Day admitted. "All we have are long-range sensor readings and the descriptions from Villani survivors. But based on what we've learned, these things adapt quickly to whatever weapons are used against them. Energy weapons stop working after a few shots, advanced missiles get confused by their defenses." Another Marine asked, "So what do we use?" Colonel Day smiled grimly. "We go back to basics. Kinetic weapons, high explosives, things that work by hitting hard instead of being clever. If they can adapt to sophisticated technology, we'll use simple violence. This was the human way of war. Other species in the galaxy tried to fight with precision and elegance, using the most advanced weapons they could build. Humans had learned something different during their violent history on Earth. Sometimes the best weapon was the simplest one." As the fleet prepared to depart, Captain Juan sent a message back to the Villani Republic. He wanted to warn them about what they were getting into. "High Counselor Thelana," he said, speaking into the communication device. "This is Captain Juan of the human fleet. We received your message, and help is on the way. Battle Group 7 will arrive in your space in 18 days. He paused, trying to find the right words to explain what was coming. "I need you to understand something about how humans fight. We are not like other species. We do not use minimal force or try to find peaceful solutions once the shooting starts. When we come to your aid, We will bring destruction on a scale that may shock you. The message continued with technical details about the fleet composition and estimated arrival time. But the important part was the warning. Humans fought total war. They used every weapon available and targeted everything that could help the enemy. We will do everything we can to protect your people and your worlds, Juan concluded. But war is ugly, and human war is uglier than most. Please prepare your people for what they are about to see. The message was sent, and the fleet began its journey toward Volani space. As they traveled through hyperspace, the human ships ran constant battle drills. Fighter pilots practiced attack formations that other species would consider suicidal. Marines rehearsed boarding actions that involved fighting their way through enemy ships that might be trying to digest them. In the Fleet Command Center, Captain Juan studied intelligence reports about the Devourers. The more he learned, the more concerned he became. These creatures seemed to be some kind of hive mind that shared information instantly. Every battle they fought taught them something new about their enemies. Most species that had encountered them reported the same pattern. Energy weapons worked for the first few minutes of battle, then became useless as the Devourers adapted. Missiles and smart weapons were neutralized even faster. The only thing that seemed to work was overwhelming firepower applied before the enemy could adapt. Lieutenant J, his tactical officer, had been running combat simulations for days. "Sir," she reported, "based on the available data, conventional tactics have a very low chance of success. These things learn too fast for normal military doctrine." "What do you recommend?" Juan asked. "We need to embrace the fact that we're humans," she replied. "Other species try to fight smart. We should fight stupid. Use weapons so simple and brutal that there's nothing to adapt to." It was a dangerous strategy. Fighting stupid meant accepting heavy casualties and massive destruction. It meant using weapons that most civilized species had banned. It meant turning space battles into brawls where the winner was whoever could hit hardest and longest. But it was the human way. As the fleet traveled toward its destiny, word of their mission spread through human space. Other species in the galaxy watched with interest and concern. Some hoped the humans would succeed and save the innocent Volani. Others hoped they would fail and eliminate what they saw as a dangerous military threat. The peaceful Volani Republic was about to become the battleground that would show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The crystal cities and singing gardens would witness violence on a scale they had never imagined. And in 18 days, the Devourers would learn why humans were called Deathworlders. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Volani territory, and immediately knew they were too late for some worlds. Captain Juan stood on the bridge of the Iron Mountain, staring at the main display with growing horror. 3-star. Systems that should have been filled with the gentle light of Volani crystal cities were now dark. Planets that had once been covered in singing gardens and living spires were nothing but bare rock and metal. Whatever the Devourers were, they had stripped these worlds completely clean. "Sir," Lieutenant J reported from her station, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the consumed worlds. Something is still active down there." The tactical display zoomed in on the nearest planet. What they saw made even the battle-hardened humans feel sick. The planet's surface was covered in writhing black masses that pulsed with stolen energy. These were not ships or buildings. They were living things that had grown from consuming everything that used to live on these worlds. "Devourer bioforms," Commander Rin said from her position at the fighter control station. Intelligence was right. They don't just destroy, they absorb and transform. Captain Juan activated the fleet communication system. "All ships maintain defensive positions. Launch reconnaissance drones, but keep all manned craft at safe distance. We need to understand what we're facing before we engage." The drones sent back data that confirmed their worst fears. The Devourers were not just raiders or pirates. They were something much more dangerous. They consumed organic life, absorbed technology, and used everything they took to grow larger and more complex. Each planet they attacked made them stronger. A communication signal came through from deeper in Volani space. "Human fleet, this is Refugee Convoy Alpha 7. We are under attack and request immediate assistance." The main screen showed a group of Volani ships fleeing from a cloud of smaller devourer vessels. The Volani ships looked like they were made of spun glass and crystal, beautiful but fragile. The pursuing devourers were dark, twisted things that moved through space like swimming predators. "All destroyers form up on me," Captain Juan ordered. "We're going to escort those refugees to safety." The human destroyers accelerated toward the fleeing Volani convoy. As they got closer, the crew of the Iron Mountain could see how desperate the situation was. Several Volani ships were already damaged, leaking atmosphere and crystal fragments into space. The Devourer scouts reached the convoy first. They attached themselves to the hulls of the crystal ships and began the process of consumption. The Volani vessels started dissolving as the alien creatures absorbed their material and energy. "Open fire," Captain Juan commanded. The human destroyers unleashed their weapons, but instead of the precise energy beams that most species used, they fired clouds of metal projectiles. Thousands of steel slugs accelerated to incredible speeds. The effect was like giant shotgun blasts that shredded through the devourer formations. The alien creatures tried to adapt to the weapons, but there was nothing sophisticated to figure out. The metal slugs were just chunks of steel moving very fast. They tore through devourer bioships and scattered their remains across space. "Interesting," Lieutenant J observed. "They can't adapt to simple kinetic weapons as quickly as they adapt to energy systems." The surviving Volani ships were brought aboard the human fleet for medical attention and debriefing. High Counselor Thelana and her aide Veltar were transferred to the Iron Mountain, where they met Captain Juan in person for the first time. The meeting did not go well. Thelana was horrified by what she saw inside the human warship. The corridors were lined with weapons. The walls were covered in armor plating. Everything was designed for fighting and killing. Even the crew quarters looked like military barracks instead of homes. "This entire ship is a weapon," she said to Captain Juan, her crystal body showing the deep purple color that meant distress among her people. "Yes," Juan replied simply. "That's what it was built for." "But how do you live like this? How do you raise families in a place designed for violence?" Captain Juan tried to explain human culture to someone who had never experienced conflict. "We don't raise families on warships. These are tools for protecting the places where families live. The violence stays out here in space, so that people back home can live in peace." Veltar spoke up, her crystals flickering with confusion. "But we saw your crew members sacrifice themselves to save our convoy. They crashed their fighters into the enemy ships on purpose. How can you ask people to die like that?" "I didn't ask them," Juan said. "They volunteered. It's what humans do when others are in danger." This concept was completely foreign to the Volani. In their peaceful culture, individual life was precious above all else. The idea that someone would deliberately die to save strangers was incomprehensible. The conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the ship. "Captain, to the bridge," came the announcement. "We have a major devourer formation approaching." The bridge, the tactical display, showed what was coming toward them. It was not just a fleet of enemy ships, it was a single massive creature the size of a small moon. The biomechanical entity pulsed with the absorbed energy of entire worlds, and it was heading directly for the last major Volani colony. "Crystallis Prime," Thelana whispered, recognizing the destination. "That's our capital world. 2 billion of my people live there." Captain Juan studied the sensor readings. The creature was too large to fight with conventional weapons. It would require something extraordinary. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Prepare for full engagement. All ships are to use Protocol 7. Tactics: maximum firepower, continuous bombardment, no energy conservation." Protocol 7 was a human military doctrine that most other species considered barbaric. It meant using every weapon available and firing until the enemy was completely destroyed, or your own ships ran out of ammunition. There was no attempt to minimize damage or preserve anything. Commander Rin launched her fighter squadrons with orders that would have shocked other galactic species. "All pilots, you are authorized to use your ships as weapons if necessary. Ram the enemy if you run out of missiles. Your job is to protect those people down there, whatever the cost." The Volani observers watched in horror as human fighter pilots prepared to die for people they had never met. In their culture, such sacrifice was unthinkable, but they were beginning to understand that humans thought differently about death and duty. The first engagement began when the massive Devourer bioform reached the outer edge of the Crystallis Prime system. Human destroyers opened fire with everything they had: kinetic weapons, nuclear missiles, and experimental plasma cannons that had never been tested in real combat. The Devourer creature absorbed the energy weapons quickly, just as intelligence reports had predicted. But the kinetic weapons and nuclear explosives were harder for it to adapt to. Chunks of biomechanical material were blasted away from its hull, floating in space like pieces of a destroyed city. But for every piece they destroyed, the creature seemed to grow two more. It was learning from each attack and becoming more resistant to human weapons. "Sir," Lieutenant J reported, "conventional weapons are losing effectiveness. The target is adapting faster than we anticipated." Captain Juan made a decision that would have been impossible for most species to accept. "Signal all ships. Prepare for close assault. We're going to ram that thing." The human fleet changed formation and began accelerating directly toward the massive bioform. They were going to turn their own ships into weapons, sacrificing themselves to save the Villani world below. High Counselor Thelana grabbed Captain Juan's arm, her crystal hand trembling. "You can't do this. You'll all die." Juan looked at her, with calm eyes. "Maybe, but if we don't stop it here, it will consume your world and then move on to attack human colonies. Sometimes dying is the only way to protect life." The Iron Mountain and the rest of Battle Group 7 raced toward the alien creature at maximum speed. In the fighter bays, Commander Rin's pilots prepared for what they knew would be their final battle. In the Marine sections, Colonel Day's soldiers checked their weapons one last time. They were all afraid, but they were also determined. This was what humans did when innocent people were in danger. They stood between the monsters and the victims, no matter what it cost them. The Villani were about to learn that being protected by Deathworlders meant watching them die for you. The massive Devourer bioform reached Crystallis Prime before the human fleet could intercept it. Captain Juan watched in rage as the creature began extending feeding tentacles down to the planet's surface, starting the process of consuming the Villani capital world. "Sir," Lieutenant J reported, "the entity is already beginning absorption of the surface cities. We have maybe 6 hours before the process becomes irreversible." On the planet below, 2 billion Villani were trapped in their crystal cities as dark tendrils descended from the sky. The beautiful spires that had grown over centuries were dissolving where the alien organism touched them. Gardens that had sung, with harmonious plant life, fell silent as they were consumed. Captain Juan made a decision that violated every rule of civilized warfare in the galaxy. "Signal Earth Command. Request authorization for Protocol Omega." The bridge fell silent. Even the hardened human crew members knew what Protocol Omega meant. It was the most extreme military doctrine in human possession, tactics so brutal that they were only used when facing complete extinction. "Sir," Commander Rin said quietly, "Protocol Omega will devastate the planet's surface. The Villani cities will be destroyed either way," Juan finished. "At least this gives them a chance to survive." The authorization came back from Earth. Within minutes, Admiral Nari had convinced the military council that the threat was too great for normal measures. The human fleet was cleared to use any weapons necessary to stop the Devourers, regardless of collateral damage. High Counselor Thelana and Veltar watched from the observation deck as the human ships began converting their cargo vessels into weapons. They were loading them with nuclear warheads and programming them for collision courses with the massive bioform. "You're going to destroy our world to save it," Thelana said, her crystal body showing colors that had no name in human language, a mixture of despair and desperate hope. "We're going to give your people a chance," Captain Juan replied. "That's all anyone can do in war." But the space battle was only part of the problem. On Crystallis Prime's surface, Devourer bioforms were establishing feeding nodes throughout the crystal cities. These smaller creatures were absorbing not just matter and energy, but also the memories and knowledge of the Villani they consumed. Colonel Day volunteered to lead a ground assault to destroy the feeding nodes. "If we can cut off the creatures, Connection to the planet, it might release its hold long enough for evacuation. Sir, Sergeant Min said. Intelligence reports say these things adapt to conventional weapons in minutes. How do we fight something that learns from every shot we fire? Colonel Day smiled grimly. We don't give them time to learn. We hit fast, hit hard, and use weapons they can't adapt to. The Marine assault began with orbital drops directly into the heart of Crystalis Prime's capital city. Human soldiers fell from the sky in armored pods, crashing through the crystal buildings to land in the streets where devourer bioforms were feeding. What they found was worse than any nightmare. The alien creatures were not just consuming the Villani, they were absorbing their peaceful philosophies and using that knowledge against them. The bioforms had learned to mimic Villani distress signals, luring rescue teams into traps. Sergeant A. Min's squad encountered a group of what appeared to be Villani civilians calling for help. But when they got closer, the civilians revealed themselves to be devourer bioforms that had absorbed enough Villani knowledge to create perfect disguises. Open fire, Min ordered, and her Marines unleashed weapons that most species had banned centuries ago. Incendiary rounds that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt steel, chemical explosives that created toxic clouds, biological warfare agents that attacked cellular structure directly. The bioforms tried to adapt, but these weapons attacked on levels they couldn't quickly adjust to. Fire burned regardless of how they changed their skin. Poison killed regardless of how they altered their biology. Explosives destroyed regardless of how they hardened their shells. This is how humans learn to fight, Colonel Day explained over the radio as his Marines pushed deeper into the city. We came from a world where everything tried to kill us. We developed weapons that work against any enemy no matter how it adapts. The battle in the Crystal City became a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Human Marines fought biomechanical horrors in the ruins of buildings that had once been works of art. The beautiful singing gardens were replaced by the sounds of gunfire and explosions, but the humans were winning. Their simple, brutal weapons were proving more effective than the sophisticated technology used by other species. The Devourers could absorb and adapt to energy weapons and smart missiles, but they couldn't easily counter fire, poison, and high explosives. In space, the converted cargo ships began their suicide runs against the main bioform. Each ship was packed with nuclear warheads and guided by volunteer crews who would die in the collision. Commander Rin led the first wave of fighter attacks, designed to clear defensive organisms away from the cargo ship's target areas. Her pilots flew through clouds of devourer biofighters using their ships as battering rams when they ran out of missiles. All pilots, she announced over the radio, remember what we're fighting for. Those people down there never hurt anyone. They just want to live in peace. We're the only thing standing between them and extinction. The human fighters dove into the mass of alien bioships like bullets fired into a crowd of enemies. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, but they were fighting for something the Devourers couldn't understand: the lives of complete strangers. One by one, the cargo ships reached their targets. Nuclear explosions lit up space as each converted freighter detonated against the bioform's hull. Chunks of alien tissue the size of asteroids were blasted away from the creature's main body. But it was still too big, still too strong. The nuclear attacks were hurting it but not killing it. "Sir," Lieutenant J reported, "the target is adapting to the nuclear attacks. It's developing radiation-resistant tissue and energy absorption organs." Captain Juan realized they needed something the creature had never encountered before, something it couldn't possibly adapt to because it was too simple and brutal. "Signal the Soul's Fury," he ordered. "Prepare the orbital bombardment packages." The orbital bombardment packages were not sophisticated weapons. They were just tungsten rods dropped from orbit, metal bars that used gravity and velocity to deliver kinetic energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. They had no electronics to be disrupted, no energy signatures to be absorbed. They were just very heavy objects moving very fast. "But sir," Commander Rin protested, "the bombardment will destroy half the planet's surface. The Villani cities are already being consumed," Juan finished. "At least this gives the survivors a chance to rebuild." The tungsten rods began falling from the Soul's Fury, like rain made of metal death. Each rod hit the planet's surface with the force of a small nuclear weapon, creating craters where devourer feeding nodes had been established. The bioform in space writhed as its connection to the planet was severed. It began releasing toxic gases and bioelectric discharges, trying to poison the human fleet out of spite. But the humans had prepared for this too. Their ships were sealed against biological attacks, and their crews wore protective gear that could handle any known toxin. The battle was reaching its climax, but the outcome was still in doubt. The devourers were learning and adapting faster than anyone had predicted. Soon they would figure out how to counter even humanity's most brutal weapons. Captain Juan prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, one that would either save the Volani Republic or destroy both species in the attempt. The massive devourer bioform was learning too quickly. Despite the nuclear attacks and orbital bombardment, it was developing new defenses and growing stronger. Worse, sensor readings showed that similar creatures were emerging from other consumed systems, drawn by the sounds of battle. Captain Juan realized they were facing not just one monster but an entire species of them connected by some kind of hive mind. Every technique the humans used was being shared instantly across the entire devourer network. Soon, every bioform in the galaxy would be immune to human weapons. "Sir," Lieutenant J reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the consumed worlds. The devourers are awakening their entire fleet. We'll be facing hundreds of these creatures within hours." Admiral Nari's voice came through on the emergency channel. "Captain Juan, you are authorized to implement Total War Protocol. The survival of both species depends on your next actions." Total War Protocol was the most extreme military doctrine humanity possessed. It meant sacrificing everything to achieve victory, ships, crews, and entire fleets if necessary. It was the military equivalent of burning down your own house to kill the monsters inside. "All ships," Captain Juan announced, "prepare for Total War implementation. We're going to end this threat permanently, whatever the cost." The plan was insane by any reasonable standard. The remaining human ships would be converted into massive kinetic weapons, their reactors overloaded to create explosions that could crack planets. The Iron Mountain itself would be the final weapon, a dreadnought turned into a guided missile aimed at the heart of the devourer hive mind. High Counselor Thelana tried to stop him. "Captain, you don't have to do this. My people can evacuate to other systems. We can rebuild somewhere else." "No," Juan said firmly. "If these things escape into the galaxy, they'll consume everything, every peaceful species, every inhabited world. This ends here, or it ends everything." The human crew began preparing their ship for its final mission. The Iron Mountain's reactors were set to overload in sequence, creating an explosion that would release more energy than most stars produced in a year. It would be a man-made supernova aimed directly at the enemy's core. On the planet's surface, Colonel Day and his Marines were fighting a desperate rearguard action to buy time for the space battle. Sergeant Min had discovered something important during the ground fighting. The devourer bioforms were not just consuming matter and energy. They were absorbing the memories and personalities of their victims. "Sir," she reported over the radio, "these things aren't just eating people. They're taking their thoughts, their knowledge, everything that made them who they were. The enemy knows everything the Volani knew, including their peaceful philosophies." This explained why the devourers had been so effective against other species. They absorbed not just technology and resources, but also the cultural knowledge that made each civilization unique. They learned how their enemies thought and used that knowledge against them, but they had never encountered a species like humanity before. Colonel Day realized what this meant. All Marines switched to protocol. Zero tactics, no mercy, no prisoners, no quarter given. Fight like we're defending Earth itself. Protocol Zero was the darkest chapter in human military history. It was the way humans had fought against each other during their species' most brutal wars. Total warfare with no rules and no limits. Every weapon was permitted, every tactic was acceptable, and surrender was not an option for either side. The Marines began using weapons and tactics that even other humans found disturbing. Chemical weapons that attacked the nervous system, biological agents that dissolved organic matter, explosive devices that created firestorms hot enough to melt metal. The devourer bioforms tried to adapt, but they had absorbed peaceful Villani knowledge, not the accumulated violence of human history. They understood crystal growing and harmony, singing, but they had no experience with the methodical brutality that humans had perfected over millennia of warfare. In space, Captain Juan was making final preparations for his suicide run. The Iron Mountain had been stripped of everything unnecessary. Lifeboats, backup systems, even crew quarters. Everything had been sacrificed to maximize the explosion that would result when the ship impacted the bioform's core. Commander Rin volunteered to stay aboard for the final attack. "Sir, you'll need someone to handle navigation during the approach. I can pilot fighters, I can pilot this." "This is a one-way mission," Juan warned. "I know," she replied simply. "My colony world was destroyed by raiders when I was a child. I joined the military to prevent that from happening to other kids. This is what I trained for." The final attack began with the remaining human ships creating a corridor through the Devourer defenses. They sacrificed themselves one by one, ramming into biofighters and clearing a path for the Iron Mountain's approach. Lieutenant J stayed at her station, calculating trajectories and targeting solutions even as the ship's hull began to buckle, under enemy fire. "Captain, I'm reading massive structural damage to the target. The nuclear attacks created weak points in its armor. If we hit the right spot..." The Iron Mountain accelerated to maximum velocity, its overloaded reactors building toward critical mass. Enemy bioships swarmed around them, but the Dreadnought's remaining weapons kept firing, clearing the way forward. In the final moments, Captain Juan opened a communication channel to High Counselor Thelana. "Tell your people that humans die for strangers because that's who we are. We're not the most advanced species or the wisest or the most peaceful, but when someone needs protection, we show up." The Iron Mountain struck the bioform's core at nearly light speed. The overloaded reactors detonated simultaneously, creating an explosion visible from several star systems away. The blast tore through the creature's central nervous system and sent shockwaves through the biological network that connected all Devourer entities. Across the galaxy, every Devourer bioform suddenly stopped moving. The hive mind that had coordinated their attacks collapsed, leaving them as nothing more than dead tissue floating in space. The threat that could have consumed entire civilizations was eliminated by the sacrifice of a single human battle group. On Crystallis Prime, the surviving Villani emerged from their damaged cities to find the feeding tentacles retreating and dissolving. Colonel Day and the remaining Marines had succeeded in destroying enough feeding nodes to break the creature's hold on the planet. Sergeant Min helped evacuate wounded Villani civilians, using medical techniques that her training had never covered. "Don't worry," she told a frightened crystal child. "The monsters are gone. The humans made sure of that." In the aftermath, only a few human ships remained functional. The Soul's Fury was heavily damaged but still capable of flight. Commander Rin had survived by ejecting from the Iron Mountain at the last possible moment, though her fighter was destroyed in the explosion. High Counselor Thelana stood in what remained of her capital city, looking up at the stars where the human fleet had sacrificed itself to save her people. The beautiful crystal spires would have to be regrown, the singing gardens replanted, and the peaceful culture rebuilt from the fragments that survived. But they were alive, and they were free, because a group of violent strangers had chosen to die for them. "We need to learn," she said to Veltar, who had also survived the battle. "We need to develop defenses, build weapons, create a military. The galaxy is more dangerous than we ever imagined." "But we're peaceful people," Veltar protested. "Violence is not in our nature." "Neither was survival, until today," Thelana replied. "The humans showed us that sometimes you have to fight to protect what you love. We don't have to become like them, but we need to be able to defend ourselves." The few surviving human ships helped with the evacuation and rebuilding efforts. They also began training Villani volunteers in basic military tactics, not to make them into warriors, but to give them the tools they would need to protect themselves. The story of the Battle of Crystallis Prime spread throughout the galaxy. Some species were horrified by the level of destruction the humans had been willing to accept. Others were impressed by their willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, but all of them understood the message. Humans would fight for anyone who needed protection, regardless of the cost to themselves. The Volani Republic established a memorial to the fallen humans, but more importantly, they began building their first military fleet. It was small and defensive, nothing like the massive battle groups that humanity deployed, but it was a start. The galaxy had learned that peaceful species could survive, but only if they were willing to ally with those who understood the necessity of violence. The Volani would remain gentle and kind, but they would never again be helpless. And somewhere in human space, new battle groups were being assembled, crewed by volunteers who had heard about the sacrifice at Crystalis Prime. Deathworlders had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and they were ready to do it again for anyone who needed their help. The peace-loving species of the galaxy could continue to sing and grow and create beauty, because the humans were willing to fight and die to protect them. It was not a perfect arrangement, but it was how the universe worked. Sometimes the only answer to monsters was bigger monsters who chose to be heroes.